All right, all right. Welcome to Efficiency in Web App Assessments for Beginners. Um, so basically, we're gonna have more or less demo session today, and I have only 4 slides. If anything comes up, please don't hesitate to ask. We will have some time for questions and answers later as well. So what I'm going to present today is actually sort of basically what I do when we have trainees joining in security assessments for web. And so usually people new to web assessments are not comfortable using their tools. So what we're cover in this session is not finding extremely hard to find vulnerabilities or deeply technical stuff, hopefully, but rather the methodology of conducting web assessments and doing it efficiently. So we will focus this session around a vulnerable web application, OWASP Juice Shop, for those familiar with it, and show the process how we can do the assessment of it efficiently. So, yeah, basically, this is slide number 2. I will cover what, more or less the thing I did, and why we should do it, and also who I am. We take the last part last this time. So why do we want to be efficient, and what does it mean to be efficient while doing web assessments? So first of all, web assessments, we typically get a week or two to assess a web page and to see whether or not we can find vulnerabilities in it. And the less time we spend on trivial tasks, the more we can spend on the difficult to handle tasks. So we will be using tools more efficiently and using the tools where the tools are good and the humans where the humans are good at solving problems. So and also the efficiency part. So efficiency in this matter, it means that the customer gets more bang for the buck. Basically, that we can focus on the really hard stuff. All right, so who am I? My name is Don. I'm a pen tester, senior pen tester at Centaur, one of the oldest Swedish security companies, if not the oldest. And I conduct every type of assessment, like web and AD assessments and infrastructure, but also on occasion red teaming and stuff like that. I really enjoy doing it. I've been doing it for 10 years now, 7.5 of which at Centaur, and here in Malmö as well. So I think the next part is slide number 3, demo. So I'm gonna start with, is everyone familiar with Burp Suite, or is it new to anyone? Everyone knows about it. All right, great, because that's the primary tool that we actually work in when doing security assessments. And we're gonna start with actually going to the web page that we're going to hack, and it's the OWASP Juice Shop. So basically, it looks like this, and we're gonna pass it through Burp. But before we do that, we need to think of things that we. If this was an assessment that a company asked us to do, we need to do some preparations beforehand. So we can't just jump in and have fun. We need to do the preparations beforehand so we know what we're actually dealing with. All right. So typically before doing an assessment, you actually have a meeting with the customer, and the customer tells you more about their web app in this case, and we ask some questions in order to better understand what we're facing, to ensure that we know as much as possible beforehand. So it's really important to ask the customer for sort of what can I expect when I start doing this. And a great place to work is actually to have the customer demo normal usage of the application and all integrations and everything, because um, it's not only the web application, but everything that consumes the data that's actually generated by the application and the users using it. So it's always good to ask because we often test in a test environment whether or not it's actually connected to any third-party services or production systems or similarly. Because otherwise, like colleagues of mine have realized, like it's not fun when stuff are connected to real world third party systems and you get several hundreds or uh, uh, thousands of invoices coming to your home or something like that. So because yeah, so, stuff like that do happen. I've had certain personal information about me changed when using my real social security number. Never a good idea. So always ask the customer to verify that it's actually not connected to third-party systems. In addition, stuff like support pages and stuff in web applications, it's good because you don't want to generate like 1,000 support tickets either, because that can really piss off the customer. Um, and it's also really important to check every role in the web application. In this instance, I think there's an admin account. We'll see, but it's important to see also everyone using the application and ensure that all the functionality that's accessible is actually tested, because sometimes you can do stuff in between roles or inject stuff that gets executed in the context of, for instance, an admin. So get an understanding of every role that's in the system and the functionality of the web app in question. In addition, I usually ask for source code as well. It's always good to have an understanding and to look at where things actually go wrong when doing testing. So, without more to do, we're actually gonna start the assessment. Yeah.
And just curious, like, so you wouldn't do blind testing, you would actually know the source code behind?
No, typically we ask for source code, but it's more of like a reference of doing. I would say in like 80% of the time when we're asking for source code, we actually get it. Sometimes it's third-party products. We don't get source code to that because it's against the license. So most of the time when they do their own coding, but not third party.
Yeah, because I'm just curious. I thought that you did the pen testing without knowing the source code.
We do also.
Yeah.
A lot of time more in my 10 years. I would say it's in the last 2 years that we actually asked for it. Um, so most of the stuff is actually, considering the time span, it's been blind. But it's good we don't do source code analysis and then attack them. We actually use it just to check where things
Yeah,
go
exactly.
wrong.
That was what I was
Yeah,
thinking, because otherwise it's kind of like cheating.
it's not cheating. All right, so if people are familiar with burp, what we actually do, it's quite important since we have the pro version in this case. We're gonna save it to a project. It's good for safekeeping, and also you don't have to start all over every day you do the assessment. So we're gonna start a normal one. And the first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna customize burp to ensure that we actually have everything set up. And one of the most important things, in my opinion, is to always check for updates. This is updated. I checked. It would be embarrassing otherwise. So check for updates. Otherwise, Burp comes with almost every new edition comes with new detection features that actually detect new vulnerabilities that haven't been detected before. So always update it. Apart from that, I usually go for the embedded browser because it has some extra features when it comes to JavaScript and stuff like that. Um, I'm gonna use that one. If you're using a normal one with a proxy, it's okay. So I'm gonna take this to a separate window, um, just to be able to see it better. So that's not the application I'm going for. We're gonna start with actually going to directly to the one. So when starting an application, it's important, like I said, to know all the features of the application. What I usually do is during the first day of the assessment is getting to know the application, more or less. So I'm gonna click everything. I'm gonna go through um, everything I can click and check which features actually exist. Oh, I have customer feedback. That might be interesting because that may end up in a backend system. Um, so I'm gonna go through every single one. Oh, here we have some nice. Oh, sorry. Over here. Here we have some wall and we have search functionality. I can search for stuff interesting. We can also see something. We're typing this one in and it gets reflected. Might be interesting. Um, and also we can see that we can actually have accounts here. And we're not yet a customer, so we can set up an account. We're gonna do that. We're gonna do everything we can during the first super secret password. It's nothing to do with my maiden name. Uh, all right, then we're gonna log in to see uh, if we have some new functionality reachable from the inside. And it seems we added some features here. We have deluxe membership and everything. It seems like we have to buy it. Uh, and the photo wall, I think it's changed. Yeah, we can pick an image and upload an image. We're gonna take this one, super nice image, put a caption in, and all of this I'm doing to just in Burp we can see that we now have a lot of things that we can actually see the request that has been sent and every endpoint that might be interesting in the future to assess. And it's important to get as much coverage here as possible. And so I typically do a lot of enumeration, and that's one of the key parts I would say in doing a proper job when assessing. A lot of newcomers they use this feature, intercept, and every time they click something, they're gonna look at it and see, yeah, I will type something here and oh, I got a new one. Now we got some WebSocket requests, and that gets sort of tedious, but it's something I see a lot when newcomers, especially since the intercept on was default in prior versions to Burp. So I see a lot of people actually sitting, looking at every request and trying everything at every request, and that takes focus from the bigger picture. So I always recommend like our trainees to like the first thing you do is turn off that thing and just browse and see what you can find, what interesting functionality you can find. So important to notice that. We also saw that we actually had some WebSocket action going on when we intercepted. It's always good to not discard the WebSocket request, but to keep that in mind that we actually have something else that we can test as well, something that gets consumed somewhere on the server. Um, Also, I like to reverse the search order. Otherwise, it's easier to keep track of what you actually see or which request gets sent. Um, so when we're enumerating, uh, we we've clicked everything in the application. Uh, we've checked everything. We've disabled intercept, and now we want to see, is there anything else in this application that might be of interest to us? All right. We can see we have order history, and also it's important to keep track of. There are some things that are always interesting to look at when it comes to web applications. The first one being authentication. It's something that is present in most applications, as well as authorization to see that you actually can only get the stuff you're authorized to see or use the functionality you're authorized to see. So those are two main parts that are present in all web applications, or most of them at least. Um, but some things are special to special pages, like this web shop. We can see here that we have payment options, and we can add new cards. Um, yeah, I think I have a card ready because it requires some tweaking to do. 9 2081. Yeah. All right. Now we have added a card. So this site obviously processes credit card information. Then it might be important to keep track that no one else can get a hold of those credit cards. So they fall under the PCI DSS, or Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. So all right, we've done some stuff. We will add some balance just to be able to do more stuff. And in this case, we can see that, oh no, I can't add more than $1,000. Of course, if I put another zero, it might be just in this case that is processed in JavaScript on client side and not server side, because we don't send requests. If we look at the proxy, we can see we don't send requests, reverse order. So it might be interesting to see whether or not this is actually limited client side. So in this case, it might be good to actually use, to use the intercept. So we're gonna intercept for once to try and see whether or not we can change this. Oh, didn't my card get, yeah, okay. Not yet. All right, we're gonna use my card that I've saved. Also, there are some handy shortcut keys that we're going to cover later. All right, let's continue. And now we can see that we actually send balance, and let's just add some zeros. All right, now we have some balance that we can play with. I think I can zoom in a bit. So this is the first vulnerability, but this showcases the examples where you actually would like to use the intercept functionality. Of course, you can replay the message and everything in burp, but it's a handy feature this time. We've seen a lot of functionality, but have we seen it all? So I always like to enumerate stuff to see whether or not. And there are several options, both in burp as well as outside of burp. So we have, for instance, in the engagement tools, we have the discover content. What this does is takes the entire history and looks for keywords and try to guess um, words that occur within the paths in this application. So it's handy sometimes, it's not always super good. But we have another tool that's a bit more good at this. Let's just use the scan. Is everyone familiar with the burp scanner? All right, we're gonna do it either way. So you have different kinds of scanning functionality. Okay, the API endpoint is probably not the best. I'm gonna just send a request to ensure we get a good endpoint like the root. This is probably better. We're gonna send it to the repeater and go to the repeater, and we're gonna remove these because the browser is caching stuff. So I'm gonna send it to intruder and go to the intruder. And from here, sorry, I'm gonna go from here and scan this one. And you have the option to crawl. I usually don't do this that often. I find it doesn't help all the time, but during certain applications, it's actually handy to do a real crawl. And particularly in the instance where you have single page applications like this one, it's actually quite handy because Burp uses an embedded browser to actually process the JavaScript and render the page in the headless browser. So it's actually quite good. And you can configure, and let's take lightweight. I usually go for select from library. I don't know. Because it's a bit tricky setting everything up from scratch. Or let's do it this time. We're gonna do it. Crawl optimization, yada yada. We're gonna just use everything default except for no. Okay, my bad. I thought it didn't use the embedded browser as default. So this will add some extra assets to our inventory, and it's going to be easier for us to actually get a sense of the entire application.
Question.
Yeah.
Is it any different from the spider functionality in older versions?
Yeah, actually, crawler is the new. You can actually set the crawler, I think, in 2 different modes. So you have the legacy one that actually works the same as the spider. What the spider does is basically going to the base of the web app, finding links, clicking them one by one, going back and clicking them one by one, and it's actually using the same session as when you started. But when you use the crawler, you can use another feature that actually authenticates and uses Burp's embedded session handling. So it's a bit different, but the default one is actually like the spider. Yeah. Yeah. In the if you use the use Burp's embedded session handling version of the crawler, you have to blacklist certain like logout. Otherwise, it will log out and Burp will be logged out. So, yeah. Um, all right. One of my favorite things to do is actually another tool. I'm just gonna cover 2 tools in this session. The first one is Burp, and the second one is FFUF. So it's a command line fuzzing tool, fuzz faster you fool. And it's quite handy. So let's just see if we can use it. You basically specify your web page, in this case 3000, and a parameter, in this case in the basic layout you just write what you want to fuzz, and then select a word list. So this is the default one. So let's I always go for sec lists, like for default. It's an open source list of security related word lists, and they have this discover content. I always go for quick hits first because that's a list that comprises of the entire path to certain vulnerable endpoints. So let's just, okay, I need to dehance. All right, so we get everything returns 200. It's bad. We can't discern which one is true or false. Fortunately, they have they have different filters that you can apply. So in this case, you can filter on status code, size, words, lines. So let's go with words. So everything returning 201 word is okay. Let's go for 207. So now we only get the actual valid endpoints. And we can see we get some 500 from different endpoints, but all of these are probably quite interesting. However, this is an unauthenticated scam because we just used the address and we don't have authorization headers. So one interesting part of using this is you can actually use a request like the one we have here, querying the API for cards. This one has the authorization header that's used in the session management of the system. So what you can use here is copy as curl. So one nice feature of FFUF it's using the same syntax as curl, almost, with some additions. So I usually just delete the 3 first arguments, write FFUF, go down, and type U. It's the URL you're going for and what you want to fuss. So in this case, I want to fuss this one, add the word list you're looking for, like user shares, lists, discover web content, and let's take common. All right, and we need to filter some words. Filter words. We can filter code in this case, 500. We don't want 500. And now it's actually doing scanning of endpoints in the API using the authorization header that's used for session management. So I use this a lot, and I use this rather than using the built-in intruder because it's typically more faster. In this case, I don't think it is that much faster, but generally speaking, my computer is a bit tired, I guess. All right, so with all this, we discover a lot of endpoints and a lot of information, and we have populated our target list. I forgot some important things. Always use add to scope on your target. So you don't actually send stuff to Cloudflare and stuff like that accidentally. So when I add to scope, you get the option. Do you want to burp to record everything that you have, or do you want it to discard everything but the included ones in the scope? So I typically write no. So it starts accumulating stuff from other endpoints as well, and it's important because you can see whether or not they're actually leaking data or interacting with other services that might be of interest to you. So I always do that, and when you do a lot of testing, it's good to always only show the in-scope. I always click these as well. Reason being, if you don't click images and other binary, is that when you get endpoints such as PDF generators, which I love, you can't see the request and the responses if you don't use other binary. And likewise, when you have image generators, so you send an HTTP request and get an image back. Um, Burp interprets that as just visiting a normal image. So I always set those two as well. Um, Same goes for the proxy. Always images and other binary. All right, so we've found some endpoints, and we want to focus. We want to be efficient when testing those endpoints. So rather than looking at each one, like cards, this might be interesting. Yeah, it's a post request. We can add some stuff here. Interesting. Rather than just sending to the repeater, that's one thing also. Being efficient is knowing how to navigate quickly. So when I want to send a request to the repeater, I just use Control R, sends the request to the repeater, and Control Shift R, I go to the repeater. And if I want to send this, Control space, and I can send it again and again and again. So that's easier than trying to navigate like, yeah, where should I go, and yeah, I should send this. It's easier to have like Control R, Control Shift R, Control space. So knowing your shortcuts is it's good. So what I see a lot of people doing is like, yeah, can I add like a text here? I always use Marquee. We'll see why. All right, I can add some text, possibly get a cross-site scripting or something here. But it's not that efficient. So what I usually do is just send it to the intruder, go to intruder, and previously everything was filled in, all the cookies and all the parameters and everything. And if we want to be efficient, and pages have like 50 different cookies, I've seen this. I've seen some people like every time they scan everything everywhere all the time, and if you have 50 cookies and you choose a scanner payload set that sends 250 requests per injection point, yeah, you get 10,000 extra requests. It's gonna take forever. So usually test them once. Sometimes actually they are path specific, but usually just test them once, deselect those, and test the interesting ones. So I usually use this feature instead of right-clicking. I've seen some people right-clicking on targets and scan. With the intruder, you can deselect stuff that you don't want to scan. So in this case, we'll let the scanner do its thing. Usually select from library instead of configuring. I usually go for audit coverage maximum or thorough. I don't see thorough. Yeah, let's go for that one. And that will send around 250 payloads per injection point. So let's just let that one scan those things while we look at interesting stuff like file uploads or in this case payment card stuff, or we haven't checked the authentication yet and stuff like that, stuff that is really important to check. So prioritize those parts instead of using like, yeah, the scanner can find you cross-site scripting, no problem.
But this is valid for professional version of Burp only these days, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. How
Yeah, but
about
it's not that expensive.
it? Yeah. How about Turbo Intruder then? I'm using it mostly
Yeah.
only for
Um,
login pages.
yeah,
The
so
WordPress.
I've actually migrated from Turbo Intruder to FFUF for everything,
Ah.
because I think we have the normal intruder. We can use this to send 4 different types of attacks with different payloads. So you can have a list of your payloads that you want to test. Let's say we want to send this in all injection points. Now we're using the sniper version, and in the community edition, this is really slow. It's sending one request per second, so a lot of people, you can actually use Turbo Intruder right in the free version. Um, so what's his name? Albinovax. He created Turbo Intruder mostly to check for. He thought also that it was a bit slow, so he created a tool called Turbo Intruder, which is an extension that we can find. I always sort by popularity, and I think, yeah, we got it on top. So this uses a mechanism similar to HTTP pipelining, I think, to ensure that you don't send requests and have to wait for the response for every thread you use. So it actually sends requests and just give me the responses. So it's way faster, and you have to code in Python to use it, more or less. So I think FFUF, it has more or less the same functionality with some exceptions, but it's much easier. You just like inject here, and specify your list. So that's why I actually prefer using FFUF compared to Turbo Intruder. But I used it before as well. All right. Let's see. So we haven't hacked anything yet. I don't know if we should. Should we? All right. Where were I? Yeah. The scanner is doing its part, so we can actually focus on. Yeah, we can see that. Yeah, it's finished. It sent 950 requests. It didn't find anything, I think. So what I typically do is just let it run for every page I visit. Like, let it run, let it do its part. Sorry, get a call. Um, just every injection point possible, let the scanner do its part, and I will focus on the things I find interesting. So let's go back. For instance, I want to check the login prompt. So now I know. Hope I'm not spoiling, but if you just type something, oh, we got an error here that shouldn't be here. What can it be? I don't know. We can send the scanner on it to verify what it thinks. All right, send to intruder and go to intruder and just put something here and autofill and remove and add it to the. Oh, it found something. I always like when you use burp and you see some tag just blinks red. I don't know if you see it, but that means something is has happened. So yeah, it says it's probably a SQL injection because it injected some information and got some juicy stuff back. Looks like an authentication token, and looks like someone would be interested in impersonating. So let's just try to use a SQL injection here, or one like or equal to one. We're in. Sorry. All right. So now we've gotten some extra. We can verify. Oh, we're admin. Good. Always good. Sneaky dude. Um, so what I would do in this instance is to use FFUF or Intruder or any other tool to ensure that we actually see what else have we found. To see whether or not we have some extra information. Another thing that I typically, this one is something you should disable also. Keeps popping up when you least expect it and least want it. No, but something that should be covered in the Q&A session before you start a meeting is actually discussing the infrastructure as well. To know not only third-party integrations and backend integrations and stuff like that, but also to see whether or not you have like load balancers or web application firewalls to ensure that you don't get blocked because you're gonna send a hell of a lot of requests and you don't want to get blocked like the first 5 minutes of the assessment because then you can't be efficient. So something else that's interesting is seeing whether or not it's actually you have a reverse proxy and you have several different backend servers and backend services. So I usually because that will depend on which attacks you perform on which endpoints. So for example, uh, I've set up not HTTPS. Uh, I've set up a reverse proxy and let's just see what we can find. All right, so we can see that we actually came across a bit of different stuff here. So we have something called shop. It's the web shop we just tested. Earlier on, I was going directly towards it and not through the reverse proxy. But we can also see that we have some default Apache stuff like service status and htaccess and htpassword, which are blocked by default in Apache. But we also have next and junk. So interesting. Uh, let's go to those. So we can go to next. All right. Greetings from Spring Boot. So we ended up at a Spring Boot endpoint. All right. Then we know perhaps that it's not the same as going to shop. So we should be wary of the different responses and see whether or not we end up in different endpoints. In this case, yeah, it looks like Spring Boot. In this case, we can inspect the headers. We get a lot of more headers. And we can see, for instance, this says that the server type is Tomcat. Going back to next, it doesn't say. So it might be that we end up in different servers. And one thing that we came across that's fairly good is actually to treat every different server as a completely different endpoint, and important to like scan for endpoints on those. I'm gonna actually use the example where we found some fun stuff. We're gonna use quick hits, and we're gonna go to another endpoint, the next endpoint. So what happens here is we found some interesting stuff. We found a Spring Boot actuator, which is used for monitoring on and other purposes. So this is actually what we came across. We found this endpoint. It is what it sounds like. It performs a heap dump of the Spring Boot Java virtual machine, and so we can go to this endpoint and see what happens. Um, it's gonna be next. It's gonna download a file, and it contains sometimes a lot of juicy information. In one instance, we came across it's 35 megs big. In one instance, we actually came across it was an endpoint that was used for authentication, and similar to this one, it used JSON Web Tokens for authorization for building the JSON Web Token, and what we found in the heap dump in that particular endpoint, we scanned and we came up with a Spring Boot actuator, and the heap dump contained the private key for signing the JSON Web Tokens, and with that key we could impersonate anyone in the system. So that was one way we actually, yeah. It's good if implemented correctly. No, actually I think it's quite good because I haven't seen that many vulnerabilities, uh, vulnerable implementations of it. I think it was like 3 years, or in CTFs. But other than that, it's actually quite good. Yeah, yeah. You mean actually JSON Web Tokens is support to be stateless? Is that the thing you mean? Yeah, yeah, exactly. And also, it's one thing that's interesting with JSON Web Tokens, since they typically are in the they are typically sent as the authorization bearer token. You actually have to store it somewhere. And where do we store those? Oh, let me see. Application. Let me see. Probably session storage or local storage. Here we have a token. And this actually means that in some instances, JSON Web Tokens are more vulnerable to things like cross-site scripting, because cookies can be protected by using HTTP only, protecting the cookie from being read by JavaScript. So if we were to have cross-site scripting vulnerability here, we could read the authentication token and impersonate that user up until the expiration time of the token. Um, Luckily for us, there are no SQL injections, right? I always use Marquee. It's fun to see things scroll. It's also quite good because I usually inject like Marquee everywhere. So when I type my name is Marquee Dan, and if somewhere it occurs, you can see it straight away. Sometimes I use the Unicode character for a car. Like a client of ours had they had problems with cross-site scripting everywhere, and I had like 100 cars going across the screen. It was quite fun. The customer enjoyed it. So um, also something that's good. Oh, I'm running over. Something that's quite good is to when you find a class of vulnerabilities, like I did in that application, and injected like 50 cars, um, I typically don't look for it anymore. It's like if you have endemic issues, go look for something else, because we want to provide value for the customer. And if the customer have like 50, they have cross-site scripting everywhere, it's no reason for us to find any more. They know of the problem, find new vulnerability classes. So I tend to go when I found my first cross-site scripting. I'm just like, no, I'm not looking for it. The scanner is gonna find 5 more or 10 more. Look for other stuff that's more interesting. Um, with that said, since I'm running over on time, um, some last parts I haven't covered authorization, but I tend to do that at the sort of last day, because you always end up like, oh, I gained some privileges, I gained access to new pages, new stuff, and you build up your target structure in Burp, and it's always good to have like the full view of the application before you start doing authorization testing. And when I normally use Authorize. It's a tool where you can more easily check for authorization issues. Highly recommended. I thought I might cover it, but I didn't today. Um, And there's actually one last part. I always end my assessment with checking the lockout policy on the login, because it's quite tricky if they've set up like a user account for you, and it might take days for them to set up everything, and you get locked out the first thing because you try to sort of brute force login and stuff. it's not good, but it's always good to check, and preferably at the end of testing. All right, I think that's it. Or do we have questions in general or specific?
It seems not.
Seems not. Everyone's hungry for pizza. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
Let's give Dan a round of applause. It was a great talk. Thank you.
thank you.